Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of our collaboration with Fresh Clinics. It's great to be in the Fresh Clinics headquarters. David, tell us for our new listeners who maybe haven't come across the podcast, what are we all about before we get into this episode?
Well, as Jake said, the podcast is called Inside Aesthetics. We started about 6.5 years ago, and we put out weekly episodes on the aesthetic space, primarily non-surgical procedures. We cover business-related topics. We started venturing into other expansive areas like general health, well-being, biohacking, all that stuff. And yeah, 6.5 years, 300 episodes. It's been a long journey. Yeah. We're still here.
Now, after episode 300, we want to do something a little bit different. So we collaborated with the guys at Fresh Clinics. We're in their studio. We've got their amazing producer, Andy, here. And we're just going to do some fresh content just to see how we can do things differently, both as podcasts, but also learn ourselves as podcasters. So with that said, what's today's episode all about, David?
Well, we're talking about business in the aesthetic space, and we are joined by Ryan Bourgeois from Texas in the USA. And we're going to be focusing on business in the injectable space at large, but primarily what's going on in the USA, which is, I guess, a new market for the Fresh guys as well.
Yeah, and we're also joined in person by John Holbrook, founder of Fresh Clinics, or co-founder, should I say. And we're going to be talking about how you guys set up in the States and your kind of perspective on how that mirrors or differs with us in Australia. I guess my first question to Ryan, it's a pretty obvious one. Tell us about your background. We know that you're a nurse practitioner, but you've got an interesting background. So fill us in and tell us all about you, Ryan.
It's ironic because I didn't plan on getting into the aesthetic realm. I always had a love for emergency medicine, and I was actually doing emergency medicine for about 15 to 18 years. 13 years of my career was actually in Los Angeles. So when I first became a registered nurse, I moved directly to Los Angeles in hopes to pursue an acting career, especially in soap operas. And I did pretty well. So for about 9 years, I was on General Hospital from 2002 to 2011. And a few of those years, I was on Days of Our Lives. So it was a great run. I had an amazing time, but I am raised here in the state of Texas, and I missed my home state. So after, like I said, about 13 years, I decided to move back to Texas. And still stuck with the emergency department and kept moving up the ladder as far as becoming charge nurse and ER supervisor. And I said, well, maybe I'll just go back to school and be a nurse practitioner. And so I did. And I never, ever planned on getting to aesthetics. You know, sometimes you have to thank the Lord for the detour, right? So I think he saw in my heart that I went through a lot working, especially in trauma facilities, that were pediatric receiving trauma facilities. So there's things that you just can't get out of your mind, you know, and I'm just very thankful that I'm just not in that industry anymore. And honestly, I'm at a point in my life whenever I pull up to a hospital and I'm out in the parking lot, my heart starts racing. You know, I start feeling I don't want to go in there. It's almost like a post-traumatic stress. And I've never suffered from anything like that. So, but no. And how I got into aesthetics was, it was an ER doctor that I worked with. And he was the medical director for Med Spa. And he said, hey, I think you'd be pretty good at this. Would you be interested in doing Botox injections? I didn't know anything about it. I was like, sure, whatever. I was always up for something new. I gave it a shot. So went to work in the Med Spa. Ended up injecting Xenon was for the very first time. And I was trained to have these patients come back for a 2-week follow-up. And it looked like they took a 5-year nap. I was like, what in the world is this stuff? You know, so I need to know more. And then I really got addicted to it. So I've always had a passion for art. When I was a kid, or say when I was in high school, I used to win art contests. And I used to love drawing portraits, especially of beautiful women. What young teenage boy doesn't like, you know, beautiful women? So, and just drawing pictures of them. I used pastels, etching, charcoal, lead. And it came very natural to me, which I thought was interesting, you know, because I was never really trained to draw or, but yeah. And so whenever I got into this industry, it was mixing, you know, medicine and science with art. And I could look at a face, and still to this day, I could look at a face and I can tell you exactly what it needs. It's like boom, 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 boom. It comes right to me. But the goal was, how do I get them to look the way that I want them to look? You know, so But we can get more into that here in a little bit when we start talking about trainings and, you know, where I've gone or where I've trained in order to get to where I am today.
So maybe let's sort of orientate the timeline a little bit. So what year was this, and what was the industry like at this point of time where you're getting into it? Because I would imagine it was probably still pretty much in its infancy.
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for about 7 years. And but when I first got into it, I don't know, there was just something about, I wasn't really into the whole HA filler thing. I was more into like the bio-regenerative stuff, you know, like I use a ton of Sculptra, I use a ton of Radiesse, I use a lot of biofiller. I seldomly use any HA filler at all. And I was like, how can I treat the face, you know, from a bio-regenerative standpoint? And the industry wasn't going that way. I remember even going on a job interview, and I was talking about as another med spa that I went to work full time for, and I was talking about using PRF because it was like the new upcoming PRP, and I was like, hey, and then the nurse practitioner was like, oh yeah, we don't really deal with that, you know, we do fillers and stuff, but even back then I was like, there's got to be something with this. You know, there's got to be something here about using the body's capabilities to, heal itself. So, but yeah, so it was difficult because everybody was so filler heavy and filler driven with the Juvederms and the Restylane. And I kept hearing it over and over. Oh, we got an FDA approval for the jawline. We got an FDA approval for the nasolabial folds. We got one for the under eyes. We got one for I was so sick of it. I was like, why are we not looking at like Sculptra? It's like this thing has been FDA approved since 2004. It's been around since 1999. I mean, it's tried and true. It's a beautiful product. Same thing with Radiesse. Radiesse's FDA approval was back in also 2009 for lipoatrophy of the face of HIV patients. And it's a beautiful product. Why are we not looking at that? And everybody kept going filler, filler, filler. And I was just like, man, this is not the answer. So, and that's what led me to say, well, who's the best in Radiesse, right? Who's the best in the world? Well, the best in the world, in my opinion, is Johnny Van Lokum out of the Netherlands in Amsterdam. And I've been training with them usually roughly about 3 times a year, probably for the last 3 to 4 years. Who's the best in the world? In my opinion, that's Sculptra. To me, I think that's Sheen O'Bay out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I train with Sheen O'Bay usually about 3 times a year for the last 3 to 4 years. So I've really learned from them, taking both of the best bio-regenerative products and using them to build my practice in the way that I treat my patients. I'm not saying that I don't use HA fillers. I just use them as a subset. You know, here at Bougie, we practice what we call the 90-10 rule. 90% of what we do is collagen stimulation and bio-regenerative. 10% of what we do is dermal filling. You still need it, but it's an ancillary product. It's just a tool in the toolbox. But yeah, and that's kind of how, the way that I thought about that, it was like, what do I feel comfortable putting in my face? I didn't feel comfortable putting HA fillers in my face. And what do I feel comfortable putting in my wife's face? I don't feel comfortable putting HA fillers in her face. At least not a lot of them. I don't mind a little bit, but not a lot. So I believe that it does have its place in the industry, of course. You can't work without it. I just think I think everybody needs to they need to think outside the box and can be using other things.
Can you qualify what the issue you have with HA is? And we've seen this around the world, you know, filler usage has dropped massively, 30-40% in some countries. But what did you see 7-8 years ago that you thought, I'm not quite comfortable with this? What was it?
I just didn't like, especially the way that they were teaching it, because they were saying, let's inject this super periosteal, you know, and you're putting it's called an intradermal filler, and that term is dermal. So I feel like it needs to be in the dermal layers. And I don't have a problem with injecting HA fillers into the intradermal layers. You know, they carry 1,000 times its weight in water, so it provides amazing tissue hydration. Placed in the right planes, it can put pressure against the fibroblasts. That can lead to a little collagen production. It can strengthen the skin, but that's the way that it needs to be used. It doesn't need to be used down on the bone in order to possibly lift the face. This is a gel. It just doesn't make sense. Can it emulate a fat pad? Of course it could. I think it can. I don't think it needs to be used like that. It wasn't even FDA approved for that. So, and that's just my thought process. You know, whenever you look at Sculptra, you look at PLLA, or you look at even calcium hydroxyapatite, you know, with Radiesse. These products are both used in orthopedics. They're used as fixation devices. They're injected into the bone to create bone. Now, research does not prove that you inject these products on the bone that it will create bone, but it does create a collagen fibrin matrix that could possibly preserve the bone. And people say, well, there's no fibroblasts down on the bone and supraperiosteal level. But research shows that there is cross communication between the osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and fibroblasts. So they do communicate with one another, because people ask me, how do you get these results with just injecting Sculptra down on the bone? Because I use a lot less vials and my results are much faster. So what takes someone to get 6 month results, I get them within the first 3. And my befores and afters prove that. I've seen my patients come in 1 month and I've taken befores and afters and I'm like, wow, okay. But like, I didn't come up with that technique. I got that from Shino Bay, so I have to give credit where credit is due. He came out with what was called the 7-point technique. I took his technique and I revised on it as the multi-point technique. And the reason I call it that is because after I started studying craniofacial aging and the way that the skull ages, I targeted those specific areas with Sculptra. And I'm precisely putting small amounts of collagen scaffolding on those areas where the bones are changing, primarily like the piriform fossa. Studies show that from the ages of 25 to 55, the piriform is going to move posteriorly on an average of 6.5 millimeters. That's a lot. The problem with the industry is they think that HA fillers in a subdermal plane is the answer for the nasolabial fold problem. That's not the problem. The problem resides down at the bone, and it also resides at the deep medial fat compartment. You start losing part of the deep medial fat compartment as early as your late 20s, early 30s. This is why 35-year-olds come into my office and they go, hey, why does my smile look like it's getting wide? Why do I all of a sudden have this like tear trough thing? Like what is going on? And I have to tell them, unfortunately, you're losing some of the deep medial fat. Your bone is starting to recess a little bit, and all we got to do is put a little collagen scaffolding to fix it. And that's my take on the way that I take care of my patients. But I also give my patients a presentation. My very first new patients, when they come in, as you can see, there's a big giant TV back behind me. I actually do a presentation for them, and I show them skulls at what they look like at 20 years and younger, 20 to 50, and 50 and over. And I show them how the skull ages as you get older. And that's how I justify my Sculptra placement, or even my Radiesse placement, because the Radiesse is, not the same, but similar.
It's really interesting. I think we'd like to come back to this maybe later on into the discussion, because I think that what you've touched on is the power of the consultation process and education. As Jake alluded to, we've had a huge reduction in HA filler usage across the world. I think part of the attraction has been just the instant gratification of the results. And we've sort of become used to that with everything in this day and age. But as we've had to transition into this new way of doing things, and the fact that, people are finding that fillers are lasting longer, and this sort of resurgence of these tried and tested products, the power of the consultation has become so important. I think that's where a lot of people struggle. And I think that sort of ties nicely into the business side of the discussion that we want to have, because if you don't get that right, then you're not really communicating with your patients. They're not going to understand what you're trying to say. Therefore, talking about these other products and educating them on the fact they maybe need to wait for a result, they're not going to walk out, with this instant revived look. It's just not going to translate. So I think that's a really important point that you sort of raised. So maybe, John, we'll just sort of pivot across to Fresh Clinics a little bit. So just tell us a little bit about your model, what's happening with your expansion into the US, and just give us a bit of background.
Yeah, thanks, David. So just want to second what Ryan said, and I'm a big fan of Ryan's approach and how he approaches his patients. And I've been in his med spa, and I've just seen his setup as well in terms of what that consultation looks like for Ryan and how it is that he goes over those things with his patients. And I think you're quite right in that. I think it's really important. I think, all this discussion about the shifts and there's been, as you mentioned, Jake, right, a big shift away from HA. I don't know that there are many people that would suggest that there isn't a role for HA. I think everybody acknowledges that there are, and they're kind of amazing products, is the truth. But sometimes the approach has been, they're the product, And, Ryan mentioned, right, they're a tool in a tool bag. And look, we got a lot of tools. And so, I think our approach with Fresh Clinics has been what we hope to be is actually also a tool, right? A tool for med spas to help them make sure that they're compliant, that they are getting the attention and relationships that they want and value with pharma, that they're able to get the education that they need, that they have software which facilitates all of that, and that they have the relationships with clinicians, both for the oversight and then when things go wrong as well. I mean, one of the things that I care a lot about and spend a fair bit of time on is actually the management of patients when things do go wrong. Now, we're all fortunate in this industry that broadly the treatments are very safe.
Yeah.
Right. In the grand scheme of medical treatments, they're very safe. Obviously, the patient satisfaction levels are very high. We wouldn't be doing it if we didn't agree with that, certainly. But they do go wrong, and things always go wrong. And so how do we make sure that when that happens, that the patients are supported and that they can have the best outcome possible when things go wrong? And then also the injectors, the nurses, the clinicians, the doctors as well, that they have the support, because the reality is in fact, things don't go wrong often enough that it's easy to become very good at managing those things when they go wrong. And so one of I think the upsides of what we've built is just a network of like-minded medical professionals who then, collaborate together to make sure that we play by the rules and that we look after our patients as well, both for good outcomes when things are going well and also when they don't go as well as we hope.
Cool. Now, for our listeners who might be new to Fresh Clinics or even the podcast, you're not actually a clinic, even though your name is Fresh Clinics.
No.
So you're like a virtual service that provides, like you said, compliance, maybe product, training, complications management. But you started in Australia.
Yeah, so I'm American by birth, although these days I do have dual citizenship, so I'm an Australian citizen as well, and I'm based in Sydney. But my family lives in Washington State. My father recently retired, was a surgical oncologist, and now he's bored, and he's actually in New York today onboarding with MSF because he realized that he got bored. So now he's going to get shipped off to Sudan or somewhere, hopefully, to go entertain himself once again. But so yeah, by birth, I'm American, but I've been in Australia now for almost 20 years. But the US is the United States, and so we started here in Australia and offering those things. Right, we're not as such a clinic, but we are a company of clinicians, in medical first, and we support clinicians who are work in this space, right? And as you mentioned, right, with oversight and compliance is a big part of what we do, and then assistance when things go wrong as well, right? And so we're in Texas as well. In fact, we're in a number of states, mostly Texas, and a few other states in the U.S. as well. I think Georgia and Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken, and ambitions to be across 50 states in the United States to offer that support. And I think one of the things that we've built here, which is ironic because John Delaney and I went to medical school together, and then we were in the hospital together, and I don't know that either of us are naturally terribly social beings, but we've also really aim to try to build a community of people that are like-minded and support each other. And I think we've done an all right job of that in Australia, and very beginnings of that in the US. Lots of work to do, but it's something that I occasionally reflect on and think, actually, this is really nice. Like, we all play in the same sandbox, and like, let's bring us together and have a community where we can support each other.
And Ryan, how did you find out about Fresh, and why did you choose to work with them? I'm assuming there's like similar services existing already in the United States. So can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of that relationship and the choices that you made to work with them?
Yeah, so their service, the way that they run things is different than, we don't really have it was been like a few years now since I've been with them. I've been with them for about 2 or 3 years. And whenever they first reached out to me, they looked at me as a trainer. They said, "Hey, we're really interested in possibly getting some trainers on the ground out there." And at first I was like, okay, first off, I've never heard of you guys. Like, what is it that you do? Where tell me more. So I looked them up, and they said, "Hey, we're coming into Dallas. We'd love to meet you." And it was ironic because at the time, my medical director, he was stepping away from it. So he didn't want to do it anymore. And so ironically, I was actually looking for a medical director, but I didn't know what these guys did. And I was on the phone with them, and I said, "Well, what kind of services do you provide? What do you do?" And then they told me about the medical directorship, and they told me about the compliance. And then they told me they were looking to get trainers, which is where they were looking for me to help. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I'm going to definitely meet you guys out at dinner. So we did. We had this small meeting, is probably maybe 10, 15 people. And I immediately connected with the Johns. I love them both. Delaney's got an ER background. So me and Delaney immediately, were like, I was like, okay, yeah. So we definitely, had common ground. And then the thing about Holbrook, is we were talking about vascular occlusions, and he was telling me the story about a vascular occlusion that probably happened probably from around the mental foramen, and it went back or the lingual artery, and it kind of went back, towards the tongue, and up under. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, how did you dissolve that? How in the world did you get Hylenex? Because and then he was telling me his approach, and there's different approaches. And I can't remember. I know now we know that we can kind of go under the tongue and inject the Hylenex. But he was telling me how he was able to go around directly to the foramen and inject the Hylenex. And I was fascinated by that story, and I was like, okay, obviously these guys are really they know their stuff, so, but yeah, and that's kind of how we met. And it was interesting. So when we were setting up the whole medical directorship, even though John's from the States, I think he kind of forgot a little bit how things ran around here. He's got to realize we're 50 small countries. We ain't really one big nation. You know what I mean? So whenever we started doing the contractual negotiations for, especially like the management service organizations, the management service agreement, and all these other, legal things that we got to go around, at the time, their attorneys, I think, were up north, probably in the Midwest, somewhere like in Chicago. My attorneys at the time were at AmSpa, and Texas laws are not the same as the laws, in maybe Chicago or wherever, so they're very, very different. And that was one of the biggest hurdles I think that we had between me and Fresh Clinics was, man, how do we get these contracts straightened out? I think it took us 9 or 10 months, because they were just kind of going back and forth. And, eventually the Johns came back out to the States. They had actually a bigger meeting. We sat down and we were just like, look, let's just hash all this. Let's forget the attorneys. Just give me the paperwork. I'm going to sign it. Let's just get this done. So, and that's what we did. And, I've loved their approach ever since.
Now, Ryan, your clinic's called Bougie Aesthetics, which is, I guess,
Correct.
a spin-off from your surname, I'm guessing, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So tell us about, the evolution of that. Why did you start a practice on your own rather than work with someone? Did you have a formal business plan, or was it done on the back of an envelope? How did you start it?
Yeah, so definitely, last name Bourgeois. I mean, Bougie. I mean, it definitely just fits. So I was like, Bougie Aesthetics. I love the sound of that. And then I ended up finding this, the B logo, and I was like, okay. But the way that the Bougie was created, the way the company was created was I was working for a current med spa, and I don't want to get into all the stuff that was happening with them, but the people that I was working for, there was some stuff going down that I personally didn't agree with. And I had to step away, which was really sad because this was the most money I ever made. This was the most fun job I've ever had. And I had to literally just step away on faith and just be like, how can I do this on my own? Because I just couldn't be with a company that when this kind of stuff was happening. So, and I'll never forget. And I was with my kids. We were driving to the beach. And I told them, I said I was making the most, and I told my kids, my kids are now 18 and 16. My daughters at the time, they were a lot younger. And I said, I told them, I'm stepping away from a job where I'm making the most money I've ever made, and I'm having the most fun that I ever had. But you know what? The way that I was raised, and my biblical morals, I don't agree with what they're doing, and I'm going to do my own thing. And at the time, I know that I was doing well over like $80,000 a month for that company, and it had nothing. I didn't really care about how much I was doing, and I was stepping away, and I wasn't thinking this could all be my money because I was getting paid very, very well. It was just the way that I believed, and I told my kids, I said, listen, I'm going to step away from this, and you can call me biblical or whatever, but the Bible says that God, if God so feeds the birds of the air, what does he do for you? So, and I told my kids that, so stepped away, and then here I am now, with my own business. And it was crazy because it was funny because I borrowed $10,000 from mom, $10,000 from my dad. They thought that they're like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? To them that, at the time they were thinking this is a lot of money. And technically 20 grand was, but you know what? I paid my dad back in about, I think it was about 3 weeks. And then my mom, I think I paid her back in about maybe like a month or maybe 5 weeks. It was within like literally and they were like, my dad was like, what are you doing? Because how are you able to pay me back that fast? Because never in my life have I ever borrowed that kind of money from my father and was able to pay him back that quickly. So he was really reluctant to even give me that money. So, but I ended up paying them back really, really fast. And within the first year of Bougie, I did $750,000. And in the second year with Bougie, I was like, how do I hit 1 million? And so how did I hit 1 million? So the goal was, and I only wanted to work 3 days a week. I didn't really want to work that much. So you make $6,400 a day for 3 days a week. It comes up to like a little over 18 grand, I think, a week. And then you end up making over 90 something thousand a month. And I ended up doing 1.2 million, that year. So I was like, okay, all right, I could definitely do this. And then, all the money that I've made in my business, I've really, you look behind me, this is what I built. And, I put it in my education, because everybody kept saying, why are you going all the way to Europe to learn? Why are you learning from this guy about Radius? And I'm like, he's the best. Mers couldn't figure out why I was spending all this money just to go out there. And even Yanni couldn't figure out why I was spending all this money to go out there. And I'm like, man, you're on a whole nother level, So, but yeah, and I just, from the message that I have is I invested everything in myself, and I recommend any of the listeners to also, invest in yourself. Nobody's going to believe in you like you.
Yeah.
I really like those. I mean, Ryan's, we work with Ryan on training, but I like Yanni's he's amazing. His results are awesome. I mean, Yanni, I don't know if you know Yanni Dave as well, but right, like he's a good guy. He's got great results, but I think that investment in yourself is right. It is a space that is ever changing. Yeah. It is very different now than when you and I started in it, Jake, and it's very different now than it was 3 years ago, is the honest truth. And it's going to be different in 3 years, right? And so, like, much respect there, Ryan, for taking it on yourself, because I think it's easy to sit back and be like, look, I've been to a bunch of trainings, I've done all this, I know what I'm doing. But actually, you got to invest in yourself. That's awesome.
Well, so I was going to say, and also listening to your kind of sixth sense that something wasn't right in your previous business or your previous clinic, and just putting the money to a side. I think that's a really strong value to understand your why, and just stick with that, because then that creates your brand as well. People believe in you because you know where you're going and what motivates you. So I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of investing in yourself, I've spoken about this like so many times on previous episodes that I'm sick of actually saying it, but the industry is maturing. It's consolidating. So every market will go through a life cycle where you'll have an inception, you'll have a growth phase, you've got the early adopters, and it grows, and then eventually it reaches a point of maturity where things start to consolidate. And I think there's a lot of people in the space who've just been cruising along, making money, having varying levels of success, and a lot of that success potentially has come just because of the nature of the just how expansive the industry has been and the margins we've been able to enjoy. But as it becomes more competitive and as our patients expect more and as the competition gets better, if you're not investing in yourself, if you're not trying to be better tomorrow than you are today, then you're going to struggle. You'll wake up one day and you won't have the patience, you won't be making the money that you were making, you're not going to feel satisfied in your job. And I feel a lot of people are at that point now. What do you think? You probably have an even better view of that than I do.
I very much agree with that. And even, for myself as well, and my patients, so, clinics in the city, and I'd walk around and I'd see my work because, you just see people walking around the city. And you've got to, you got to live with your work, right? Yeah. But also, we need to continue to be better and do better. Yeah. And how are you going to get to that? It's in self-improvement. A lot of that's training. And I think, again, to Ryan's point of doing that and finding the best and then spending time with the best, the way the industry so often works, unfortunately, and we work a lot with all of us work with the pharma companies in some way or another, and they do a lot of trainings. But the honest truth is, I don't know that there's anybody that thinks that that's a great idea, including the pharma companies, right? They train injectors on their products, and I get that that's why. But that's like if orthopods were trained by device manufacturers in how to do surgeries, right? It's clearly not the way that it should be. And so I think I don't see that changing necessarily from their perspective anytime soon. And I get that approach and why that it is that way. And they need to train people on their products. But I think if you want to stand out, if you want to be better, if you want to get those results, continue to get better and better results that you're proud of, that you give to your patients, you've got to look after yourself. You got to invest in yourself. And you're going to take it upon yourself to, find who is the best for what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that kind of goes back to Ryan's conviction. He knows who he is. He knows what he wanted to do, what he stood for, where his area of specialization was, and sought out the people that were best in class, and then invested and backed himself to do it. And I guess that kind of leads to my next question, Ryan, the obvious one that I guess most listeners will be thinking is, well, where did your patients come from? You started this new business. You left the place that you were at previously, and I'm assuming you probably started from scratch. Maybe some of those patients followed you. I'm not sure. But can you just walk us through your strategy of how you created your brand? Where did your initial patients come from? What were your marketing strategies? Because, every engine needs a starter motor. So can you just walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, especially, I know you were there in Australia, and I got literally called. I say that I got called out on stage, but it was shocking to me because people say, hey, how did you get to where you are today? And my big thing was post befores and afters. Post befores and big befores and afters. Prove your work. Show that you know. And I remember someone in the stage, someone in the audience raising their hand and was telling me, they go, we can't post befores and afters. And I was literally just jaw dropped on stage. I was like, what? What do you mean you can't post befores and afters? And all this whole ruling and stuff that you guys were going through, it was a great learning lesson for me, because immediately I was like, well, then you need to show everybody what you know. You need to teach everybody. You need to prove to them that you've got the educational background and that you got the knowledge of how the face ages and how you can address it. But yeah. But as far as how, my patient clientele. So whenever my patient clientele, the place that I was before, it was a lot of lips, it was a lot of cheeks, it was a lot of young girls. But then I honestly, over the years, those young girls have phased out. Now I get more of much older women, well into the 70s, that just will not have a facelift, so the challenge is, for me is okay, all right. So, and then I go through their skull and I show them, the craniofacial aging that they've had. I'm like, the maxilla, I can tell you right now, has already made an 11 to 15 degree shift. You've already moved in roughly 6.5 millimeters. You've got mandibular retrusion, that's causing, this area, the labial mandibular crease to be more, prominent. The lateral aspect of the periorbital rim, right? So, and that starts to shift outwards as you get older, creating the palpebral malar groove. And then the ramus, as the ramus starts to move inwards, and we're just talking about the bones, right? So, and explaining to these women, how to address it. So it has really pushed me to learn how can I address this, man, because these women won't have a facelift. Like it's, but even the work that I'm doing, even when they do go have the facelift, it's still going to help them. So I had to make this shift of just doing lips and cheeks, which was pretty easy, to how do I treat these older women that are actually financially sound, and then of course my prices, when I did open up my practice, my prices went up. And so I weeded out the younger girls that were like, well, maybe he's a little too pricey, but it transitioned to more to the women that are now. I'm seeing attorneys, I see other doctors, nurse practitioners, PAs, nurses, real estate women, so my clientele demographic has shifted dramatically, and I like the challenge. I do. I do. I really like that. So, but that's how. And then how did I get to where I am? Of course, that when I did work for that previous med spa, one of the things that they instilled in me was post, Instagram, post. Content is the new cash, right? Post. And so, and I did, and it's never ever left me. And I've constantly been posting befores and afters. And I just keep posting, and it has helped me, a tremendous amount, because a lot of people come to me and they go, man, I saw that transformation you did on whatever it may be, usually someone that's a lot older, and I was like, God, if you can help them, like I'm not that old, so I know that you could definitely help me, or vice versa.
Question back to John. So you've obviously reflected on where we are at now with regulations in Australia. It's still kind of evolving. And then obviously you've got challenges in America because each state is different. So can you just sort of summarize what you guys have noticed as a business, what's different in America and how you overcame those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it continued to overcome, definitely, in terms of the states. And Ryan's right. I think maybe I've been outside of the U.S. for too long now. And in fact, I was on a call the other day, and I know that my accent has shifted a little bit, and I am embarrassed by that, if I'm honest. I know that it's snuck in. My wife is British, and I live in Australia, and inevitably, I'm sure my vowels have a little shifted a bit, and so I apologize to every American out there for not doing you proud. I'm sorry. But one of the funny things is essentially going back to the States, right? It is, as Ryan said, right? It's like 50 countries, right? One nation, 50 countries, and every single state has its laws and its medical boards, etc. And so navigating that is it's tricky, is the truth. Like, it's just a lot. It's a lot to do, In Australia, obviously the states here differ a little bit, but largely we work within a national framework, right? And it's very different in the US. And so and culturally as well. I mean, two things are true. I sometimes forget that I'm not in the US, in that Australia is not, it's a bit of a cousin of the United States some ways culturally, right? There's certainly plenty of differences, but there's plenty of similarities as well, right? It's an Anglophone country as well, similar to England. And there's probably 5% of things that are different, but that 5% matters a lot. Mm. It really matters a lot. And the approach in med spas is different in the US. I think it's a bit broader, which, if I can speak, personally, some things I think that's great. Other things I find challenging. Maybe not things that I think are such a great idea. But the scope of what, people want to do in med spas, and it's very different. There's not like a consistency necessarily across all med spas of, this is our offering, right? You kind of know what you're going to get. Actually, pretty broad, and it can be quite different. But that is certainly, it's a challenge. For us, as so much of what we do is making sure that it's a compliance play, and making sure that we're compliant, and the med spas we work with are compliant as well. And so, but it's been a good reminder in not only differences between where we are here in Australia and the United States, but even across the states, right? And there are large cultural differences, between Washington State and Texas. I mean, honestly, this is like, I don't know, in some ways, maybe Queensland is like Texas, and New South Wales is a bit like Washington State, so there's cultural differences within the country, certainly. And so navigating that normally from a regulatory perspective, but then how do we, as we build out that community, how do we bring people together and in a way that everyone can help each other navigate what it is that they face in their day-to-day. Some of those things will be shared regardless of international borders and certainly regardless of state borders in the United States, but some of them are going to be different, right? The aesthetic of Washington State is just different than Texas, right?
Yeah.
If I could push you on one of those services, because I think you and I have spoken about this before, it's things like IVs, IV drips.
Yeah.
That's pretty common in the States. Every Medi-spa is doing it. No one bats an eyelid. Here in Australia, seen as more controversial, less evidence-based. So how do you guys reconcile that? Because you might have to service clinics who want to offer that.
You're right. And it's one of those things that I struggle with, is the truth. So the model is a little bit different in the United States. So to be clear, to start out, we don't support IV therapies here in Australia. I don't think that there's evidence to support them in people that are well, and I have issues with that generally. And so we don't, because I don't think it's the right thing to do. Nonetheless, it is well established in the United States, and it's a bit of a thing. And the model is also a bit different in the United States. So in Australia, in some ways where, there's this hybrid healthcare model where there's, an RN who is providing service, in person to a patient, and they're backed by a doctor, who in our case is often, via telehealth. It's almost like you rent a medical director every time you have, you perform a treatment with your patient, right? And so that doctor then oversees a treatment for that patient, but doesn't necessarily have responsibility for other things that you do in the clinic, right? So lasers as a fine example in Australia. And so, Laser Clinics Australia was a thing long before us, and they kind of established the market in a lot of ways in terms of laser hair removal, but also other laser treatments. And so there are a lot of laser technicians here, and depending on where you're at, you actually don't need any doctor involvement at all, right? So there's no oversight required by doctors.
Yeah.
Now in Texas, depends on the situation, but you need somewhere between 1 to 2 medical directors that oversee laser. And so for your med spa, and in fact, what you need in operating a med spa is you need a medical director that oversees the med spa, right? That takes on that responsibility effectively of the practice of the med spa. And so it's different then, because those doctors then get to make that choice, right? There are things that those individual medical directors that we, help connect with med spas. Some will say, look, I'm just not comfortable with fill in the blank, right? Whatever it is. I think largely across the US, doctors seem okay with IV therapies, but let's use that as an example. Someone may say, look, I just am not comfortable doing IV therapy. It's actually, like, for me, whatever the reason, I think it's unsafe, or I, ethically I don't like it, or whatever, then that's part of the connections that we make with those med spas of helping them to find a medical director who is comfortable, who understands the therapies that they are providing in there, offers them that medical backing as well. So do I love it? No, but there's lots of things that I don't love that I also am not necessarily overseeing, right? And because that model is different, and the oversight model is different, it actually lends itself a bit to saying, that doctor, who am I to say if that doctor is comfortable with that, what is right in terms of that practice.
Yeah. Actually, could I ask Ryan, how does this work operationally? So you've got Fresh Clinics sort of, I guess, in the background with the infrastructure and the software, but you presumably got your own medical director as well?
Yeah. So it's interesting too, because there's like 22 or 23 other states, where nurse practitioners practically, as long as they have the hours in their profession, because I'm family or whatever specialty they're doing, that they can operate pretty much as a physician. And Texas is not one of those states. So the way that it has to work is you do have to have a medical director. And the way that we have everything set up here, which is what I really loved about Fresh, was they made it, once we got behind the whole 10 months of the MSA and the MSO and all this setup stuff, and we got that all down, once we started taking the compliance binders, And then once we established the medical director, which the medical director, we meet with her usually about once a month, and we just talk to her about a few things, about whatever, we're very secure here. We've got ultrasound capabilities. We can take care of our own vascular occlusions and anything that goes south, but we still include them in those monthly meetings of, hey, this might have been something that, just wanted to let you know, but we took care of it. But, we reached out to Dr. such and such down the street and he helped us out, or whatever it may be. We just kind of keep them in the loop. One of the things that I do love about Fresh Clinics, as far as their shopping online platform, where you can order the products that you need, it's just so easy. It's almost like an Amazon. And then one of the things that we're currently working on, that I'm working on with Fresh, is their electronic health record system. So as you guys know, especially you, Jake, being working in the hospital setting, you got to know that your electronic health record will make you or break you. It is what you're using day in and day out. And I'm hopefully working with Fresh to and help them as far as their charting system and how that goes. I currently use Aesthetic Record, and I've been using them for years. And the reason I do Aesthetic Record, it has to deal with the way that I run my practice. When my patients come in here and we do the good faith exam, after we do the good faith exam, we take the pictures. The pictures go up on the big screen back behind me, and then we actually go through their pictures, and I actually chart in real time on their face. So they see exactly what I'm giving, how much I'm giving, and where I'm giving it, and why I'm giving it. So, I'm working with Fresh, and hopefully we can help their electronic health record. It's just how I've always ran my stuff.
I've seen it, Ryan. It's awesome. It's actually a really great setup that, like, essentially this massive TV in front of the patient, and it just like this, you get to walk through the face while they're looking at their face. It's excellent. It's really good.
Can we talk about your software system, like sort of at large, in terms of, I guess, the data and insights that you're able to provide for your customers?
Yeah.
I'm talking to people from a business mentoring coaching perspective all around the world every week. And no matter what question comes my way around, do I take on a new staff member? Do I take on this device or start offering this service? Is it time to expand? Like, everything for me always comes back to, well, what does your data say? Like, how profitable is your business? What's your margin on that? What's your retention rate? All those kinds of things. And most people don't have their head around this. They don't know their numbers. They don't know how their business is performing. And so a lot of these decisions are then made based on emotion or recency bias. And I've had the privilege of looking at your dashboard. A couple of my clients were looking at it, and someone of your team ran me through it. And so I think this is a great tool in helping practitioners make informed decisions based on fact rather than emotion with their businesses. So can you sort of explain to us how your platform works and the sort of data and insights that people are able to get from it? And then we can maybe cross to Ryan and see how he...
Yeah, it's really... It's something that, as Ryan mentioned, it's very much a work in progress in the US, but more established here in Australia. Neither John nor I are software developers, and so it turns out that, I think I'm all right with computers. In the very early days of stuff, it was, John and I built it, but we've long gotten past that. It turns out building software is a fair bit of work.
And expensive.
And it is expensive, I'm afraid, yes. But so the way that, really in Australia and we will get there in the United States as well is, right, we have all this because of the way the EMR works, and you've got to input this data very specifically on the treatment per patient. What we then get to do is then feed that back to the clinic to say, look, here's all this information, like very specific, detailed information about what's the dosing, where is it being used, how is it, when are you seeing your patients, when are you using treatments in conjunction well, in the same appointment, across, time, what does that look like, what is your follow-up, when are patients dropping off, et cetera, right? Because I think you're quite right. In the industry, we've grown, but we've almost grown in spite of ourselves. And there's good practices, which is well established in the world, right? In terms of, well, this is how you run a business, right? And so much of what we're trying to deliver back to those that work with us is value in that way, right? Like we certainly do trainings and, work with, and we'll continue to work with Ryan on delivering amazing trainings, because it's an important part of being a good injector and delivering those results to patients. But very few of us, and doctors are well known to be terrible at business, but very few of us are naturally excellent business people, right? So we've got in decent clinicians to deliver good results to patients, but maybe running a business isn't part of our core competency or skill set. And so we then deliver that back to the clinics at a very granular level that they can go in and, look at per injector and different demographics of patients and slice it up in a variety of ways so that actually they can make those informed decisions about what makes sense, as opposed to just like, well, I think this feels good.
Yeah. We actually go into a lot more detail in episode 1, where we spoke about your state of medical aesthetics and your big report that you did. So if you've missed that episode, go back to episode.
Have a listen. It was really impressive. Something we'll continue to do as well.
Yeah. Now, Ryan, can I sort of ask you, how do you juggle your clinical sort of duties and injecting and teaching training with running your business? And I don't know if you have staff, how big your clinic is, what services you're doing, but how do you juggle all of that? And do you have any sort of key tips?
Yeah, it has definitely been challenging, trying to get, so I created the Academy of Regenerative Aesthetics, which created it back in February, and we've got in the online platform where we have a few of the classes listed. The thing is a lot of people want to do in-person trainings. They don't want to just buy it online. They want to come to you and they want you to guide them. So I've been trying to navigate through that. But as far as how big is the practice is I have another nurse practitioner. His name is Haley. He's phenomenal. He specializes in sports medicine. So he uses ultrasound guidance for joint injections. So whenever I introduced him to the face and he took his ultrasound to the face, man, this guy can put a needle and dissolve anything, anywhere. It's absolutely amazing. And then I have another nurse that I recently hired. Her name is Missy Injects, and she's new to the staff. And then I have a medical esthetician. Her name is Trisha. She's known as the Bougie esthetician. She's amazing. She's all things skin. But and as far as the staff, it's pretty small. We that's one thing John was saying is we're excellent clinicians, but we may not be such good business people. So trying to navigate running this company, Bougie, trying to build a company, the Academy of Regenerative Aesthetics, and also making the time to be a husband to my wife and a father to my children. I'm going to be honest with you, it's not easy. It's something that I'm still learning, so I need some advice. But, because like I told you before, I don't really like to work that much. Whenever I was only working 3 days a week, life was a little bit simpler. I had this little bitty 10-foot by 10-foot room, and my overhead was super low, but then I bring on staff, and now they need me and I need them. So it's something that I'm still learning, and I do not have the answer. I wish I did.
Do you diarize time? Do you say, Monday it's admin day and the next 3 days are injecting? Do you have like a schedule where you're meeting up regularly with the team? Like, what's your flow like?
That's what I'm trying to learn. Yeah. So right now, I used to do like a Tuesday, through a Saturday, or maybe a Wednesday through a Saturday injecting. And now I've kind of cut it to where it's almost like a Wednesday through a Saturday injecting. And I'll kind of do like an admin maybe on a Monday or a Tuesday, or maybe I'm working on things for the academy on a Monday or Tuesday. And then just meeting kind of when we're especially like all here together, which is honestly not often, because Missy's here like on a Monday through Thursday, and Haley's here usually on a Friday and Saturday because he has other ventures and stuff that he's doing too. So it's kind of hard to get everybody together. As far as my management style, it's more collaborative. It's not a dictatorship. I talk to my staff and ask them about things. Today, for an example, me and Trish sat there and we're like, oh my gosh, we ought to put together this Sculptra radiofrequency microneedling Lutronic Ultra combo package that we're going to sell. And we did. So why would we put that together? Well, we're putting Sculptra down on bone, building collagen at the lowest level. Then we're using radiofrequency microneedling to kind of hit the epidermal dermal junctions. And then we're using the Lutronic Ultra to finish off right on top of the skin, up to the top, to that stratum, trying to keep that stratum corneum at the top. So we're hitting all levers of that collagen stimulation and selling that as a package. So we're still working through all this, but it's, we're still working through it.
So sort of like looking into the future, I mean, if you could crystal ball gaze and sort of give us your thoughts on how you think things are going to evolve over the next sort of maybe 5 to 10 years. We've got AI. I mean, I was looking the other day, like there's hospitals in China now that are like running with surgeons that are like robots, and there's cars driving themselves, and things are moving at like this rapid pace. So where do you think it's all going, and sort of where do you think, I guess, platforms like Fresh sort of sit in terms of how the industry is going to progress and sort of move forward?
Yeah, I think the AI is definitely going to help us. I mean, I use it frequently. I mean, that's how I put together some of these packages, and how you come up with some of the names, and how you put together, the ones that use AI, I think are going to be fine. But I think the ones that don't adapt and, don't use it, I think they're going to be left behind. It's not a matter of AI taking over your job. I think it's a matter of you using it, and how do you effectively use it, especially with research nowadays. I mean, I'm kind of a nerd. When I get bored, like today, for an example, I was asking AI, explain to me cross communication, between osteoblast, osteoclast, and fibroblast, and it gives me a whole breakdown and stuff. And then I go back and, of course, make sure that it's legit. But, it's using it as education, but you also, just like anything else, you got to make sure that it's valid, right? So, but I think that it's going to play a huge role. It's helping me be a better business person. Like, if I run memberships here at Bougie, and I ran the memberships by AI, saying, hey, is this a good deal? And they would kind of say, well, your profit margins on this are bad. Your profit margins on this are good. Maybe you should think about doing this. Okay, cool. So using it, from a business standpoint, I think it's going to be super, super helpful. As far as where do I think that maybe the injectables are going to go, I've always been in a belief in regenerative and bio-regenerative. And I just wish that the government, especially like the FDA, would get in on this. It's really tough, because I know that micronutrients, like polynucleotides and all these other things that you guys like NCTF and, all these other things that you guys are very familiar with. I know that this been around. It's been around for 42 years. And it's been very, very effective. The problem is, here in the States, it's not FDA approved, which means you can't inject it. And I don't think we're doing our patients justice. We have to actually microneedle it. Shino Bay recently did a publication where he mixed Radiesse with NCTF, and he was blending the two and injecting them in the subdermal plane, and his results were spectacular. Same thing with some of even like, when they're doing like fat transfers, and they're mixing the polynucleotides and the micronutrients with the fats, or even mixing it with the Radiesse, mixing the Radiesse with the fat and injecting it. Renuva, I don't think you guys do not have that over in the States, but what Renuva is here in the Australia, what we have here in the States is it's donated fat matrix. And you inject that into the fat planes, and your body somehow miraculously knows how to make fat from that fat matrix. Well, now, and that was actually taken from cadavers. Now there's a new company. I can't think of the name. I think it's Allograft or something, sort of the A, and they're actually getting donated fat, and they are taking that fat matrix, and they're actually they're injecting it into the fat compartments of the face. So I believe I think that's kind of where, where medicine, as far as injectables and stuff, is it really, really going to go?
Yeah, totally agree. Now, last question to John, kind of the same question, but to Fresh. Where are you guys going in the next 5 to 10 years? How are you going to adapt? How's your software going to change? And how are you going to help clinics better?
This is a great question. I mean, Ryan, I enjoyed the answer, because I wholeheartedly agree. In terms of, what we're doing, is a lot of it's just figuring out what it is that provides value for the clinics, right? We try really hard to create a situation where what is good for the clinic or the med spa it's mutually beneficial, right? It's good for us. And that, I mean, fundamentally, like, you've just got to solve problems, right? So what are the problems that a lot of clinics or med spas face? I think a lot of it is business problems, right? That, like, most people are decent at injecting, and they'll continue to educate themselves, and there is just an inertia in the industry, a lot of it driven by pharma, of new stuff comes out, and it will continue to evolve. And so that will continue to be, but I think, how do we make sure that, A, we support that and we continue to support that well, but then B is actually those things that we talked about, right? In terms of business, like, most of us are naturally good at that. And that makes a difference between you being able to go and spend time with your kids, or you're still stuck in the clinic, right? Like, and I think we talked about this with the state of aesthetics, but one of the findings from the state of aesthetics that, the primary reason that people got into aesthetic medicine wasn't for the money. It was actually it was really the flexibility. They could spend time with their kids. I mean, that wasn't the question as such, the way that it was posed. But, like, the truth of it is, most of us just want to see our kids more, and so running a business well enables you to actually achieve that which you really set out to do, right? Of course, every one of us cares deeply about delivering good results to our patients. It matters a lot, but fundamentally, you go home, like, I'll go home tonight and I'll go, like, play with my kids, and, like, I care desperately about that, and most of us care desperately about that, right? So what enables that is actually running a good business, make sure it's safe for your patients, you're delivering those good results. But that's going to happen. How do we optimize for making sure that, you're well supported, and that actually these things that maybe aren't naturally your core competencies, that you get good at them, and that you understand them well, that it's easy for you to do, so that you're not, spending late nights trying to work it out.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, yeah. Thank you, guys. Really appreciated that chat. Any final comments from you, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, on what John was saying, yeah, you want to sleep at night, so you want to do things, to as safe as possible, and that's why, you want to get as educated as well as you can, and learn anatomy, you need to know your anatomy, you really do. One of the best lessons I think that I had in how I started, actually, it's crazy because people think, injecting foreheads is pretty dangerous, and yet that it is. But if you know the anatomy, and you can do it very, very safely. And I'll never forget, I had a lady that came into me, and half of her forehead, and she was on one of my posts, on half of her forehead was all the soft tissue is, and I can't remember if it was if it was burned or just a deformity. And I spent literally, I'll never forget, is injecting her with she's like, "Can you fix this?" And she's crying, in the office, and she's like, "Can you fix this?" And I said, I don't know that I can, but I'm going to find an answer. I'm going to figure this out. And I said, "Let's do the Botox, and I'll see you in 2 weeks." And so I did the Botox. Well, what she doesn't know, in those 2 weeks, I mean, I delve into the books deeply, and I was like, how do I treat the forehead, and how do I treat it safely? And then, cause I got to do everything in my power to help this lady, I've got to help her. I've got to do this. And I did. I studied super, super hard, and I learned, a lot about, placing the cannula into the subgaleal space. And I know that the measurement from the supratrochlear to the retinal artery is, ranges from, 0.04 to 0.12. And I know that I keep my dosages, in a subgaleal space with a 22 gauge cannula perpendicular to the vessel, and injecting 0.025, I should never ever be able to cause blindness, or my risk is super, 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 super low. And then, so I only say that story is, one is, we're here to change the lives of others, but you got to do it safely. Don't be a maverick and start doing things on your own. You need to get educated, and you need to train with people that are going to spend time with you over and over and over. The problem in this industry is a lot of people take these weekend courses, and now they're this master injector, and that's insane. So there's multiple techniques that I have learned from Yanni Van Locum, and it's taken me years. It's taken me years to master all of those techniques. So you can't just go to this weekend course. You need to be with that trainer, that instructor. They need to grab your hand and push you through those planes of tissue, hear that audible click, feel that cannula glide across the bone. There has to be that tactile feedback that you're getting. It's just a lot of these people, I think that it's just kind of scary what I see out in the industry. And I guess if that's the advice I have is, study, hit the books. It's for everybody's safety and yourself,
Great. Well, congratulations on running such a successful business. It's inspiring stuff. Carry on. And thank you to John for your insights and telling us all about Fresh again. We've done this a few times. It's good to learn about what you guys are doing in America. Just a couple of parting comments. As part of our collaboration with Fresh Clinics, we're running a special offer. So for all of our listeners, if you want to take advantage of a $500 free credit, just hit the link in our podcast description and you'll either get some credit for skincare or training. Now, depending if you're in Australia, America, that may differ slightly, but all the details will be there. So just check it out.
Yeah, totally. And as far as our Patreon community, obviously we've got like a huge number of people from all around the world who engage. It's a positive space from new injectors to global key opinion leaders and people like Ryan. Ryan, we'd love to see you there one day as well, buddy. But if it wasn't already obvious, Ryan is just a wealth of information. It's just like spewing out of him. Like he's got so much knowledge to share. You were a keynote speaker last year at the Fresh Life conference. I got to watch a couple of your talks. Fantastic, inspiring stuff. We've got copies of those talks that are going to be available for our Patreon members. So if you want to head on over to our Patreon website, as Jake suggested, all the links will be at the bottom of the podcast, and you can check out his talks there and get the full Ryan Bougie experience.
Yeah. And then last message, Fresh run their massive conference every year called the Fresh Life. This year it will be from the 2nd to the 4th of September in Brisbane. You guys are going back to Brisbane, I gather?
Going back to Brisbane.
It's a great venue. I was there a couple of years ago.
Yeah, am I going? That's what I need to know.
Exactly. So if you want to check out all the information of how to buy a ticket, what it's about, maybe some of the early speakers who are signed up, again, the link is in the podcast description below. So thanks again, guys. Hope you enjoyed that podcast or enjoyed watching this on YouTube or our Patreon, and we'll see you soon.